Hello again. We've heard an awful lot over the last 18 months or 2 years about the possibility of the NHS being overwhelmed and hospitals collapsing under the pressure of the demands placed upon them. None of this has happened, of course. A new scheme announced recently will ensure that the NHS faces catastrophe before the spring. In addition to people being prevented from visiting their doctors and speaking face to face about their health, it has now been agreed that all routine health checks on those over the age of 75 are to be halted, at least until April. This means that instead of monitoring blood pressure, lung function, heart rate and so on of the most vulnerable section of the population, they will simply be sidelined throughout the coming winter. Now, I'm not overly fond of old people myself. To be frank, I find they get on my nerves a bit. But even so, I think this is a bit much. Of course, the powers that be might have decided that this age group are what was called in the Third Reich nutzlose Esser, or useless eaters. Perhaps this is intended to be some form of subtle euthanasia. And the hope is that those useless eaters will simply fall prey to emphysema, diabetes and heart attacks, and thus ease the strain on the country's medical resources. If this is the strategy, then the government could at least be honest about it. Most of those old people use those routine appointments to mention other medical symptoms. For example, they might say, "Oh, it's probably nothing, doctor, but I've noticed there's blood in my wee." That means that cancer of the bladder or prostate can be detected early. Or it might be that the blood pressure is growing dangerously high and that a stroke is imminent. Of course, if all those old people would just die quietly without any fuss, then this would only create pressure on the funeral industry rather than the National Health Service. But that isn't what's going to happen. In fact, they will start collapsing from strokes and heart attacks, from diabetic crises and breathing difficulties. What will happen then? Why, somebody will dial 999 and they'll be taken to A&E, of course. Once there, many of them end up in intensive care. Winter is a tough time for A&E and intensive care at the best of times, but just imagine what it will now be like this winter. Instead of managed admissions and doctors being able to avert serious health problems by spotting early signs of trouble, every one of those old people with a health problem will end up in hospital. Nothing more likely to overwhelm the NHS can be imagined. I think this is what they call a self-fulfilling prophecy. They are worried about overwhelming the NHS and so implement a policy which guarantees that the NHS will be overwhelmed. I'm not, as I've said many times here, a fan of conspiracy theories, but in this case it really looks as though somebody has devised a policy which is designed to create a continuing crisis which will bring about many deaths between now and April. Surely even the rogues and fools who are currently running the country must know that the consequences of this policy are going to prove lethal for the most vulnerable members of society.